the son, grandson and great-grandson of newspaper proprietors and editors who have successfully run regional newspapers over 3 generations, and would have been 4 if I was unfortunate enough not to have won the most recent election, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm proud to rise to speak about the Evidence Amendment Bill this evening. Shield laws for journalists are long overdue in this state and will protect news sources where it is clearly in the public interest to do so. Given my family history, I am in the prized position to know firsthand the power of the media and the vital role it plays in going into bat for the underdog and the vulnerable, for the victim of unfair play or the cause that needs support and quickly. In fact, Mr Speaker, I would argue that the vital role it does play is an underappreciated one, and one that deserves more recognition. The media can provide a societal moral compass, a leveller for common sense, a voice when there is nowhere else to go for help, and I will always support journalism and the role that it plays in ensuring wrongdoings are held to account, that corruption is exposed and that maladministration is uncovered. That being the case, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's no surprise that members opposite oppose this very protection whilst they are in government. Regional newspapers especially are renowned for the causes they support which lead to change for their communities which they serve, and I've seen how our newspaper is approached by people in need of a voice when every other avenue for help has been tried and failed, and a community action is needed. The two newspapers in the Narungga electorate, the Yorke Peninsula Country Times and the Plains Producer, and their editors Nick Perry and Les Pearson, who are both award-winning editors in their own right, Mr Deputy Speaker, are both highly respected because the journalists within those publications care about the readership they serve and the actual communities they live in. Both publications are held as Bibles for the locals who rely on them for information, to know the issues of the day, what's on, when and where, and who's doing what. The success of regional newspapers is derived, I believe, from the fact that journalists are locals who live in the communities they serve. They are seen at the local shop and at the local sporting field. They are volunteers on committees and are mindful that all actions and words published will be judged personally by readers, and they will be told face-to-face what is thought of their work when they are next down the street by the person affected. It is a very practical way of being held to account, Mr Deputy Speaker. The personal side of regional journalism also ensures that contact books are full and that an open-door policy for editors is essential. Yes, Facebook and other social media also provide information and are valuable communication tools. But for many, particularly in the region, the mantra still holds true, that if it is in the local paper, it is fact. The sources are credible and the work of the hard-working journo is backed by a strong code of ethics. We trust local journalists to print the truth, the facts, without fear or favour, propaganda or self-interest, and in order to preserve this integrity, to preserve this trust in what they are reading is accurate, the amendments proposed in this bill are vitally important. Once respect for a journalist is lost, it is lost forever, and it is imperative whistleblowers seeking assistance from the media to shine needed light on corruption, maladministration and wrongdoing can approach confident their information will remain confidential. And it is equally imperative journalists can use that information they receive without fear disclosure will result in jail time. For journalists, loyalty to the source is paramount. Protecting sources has been described as the golden rule of journalism to override all other considerations, including the administration of justice. Journalists want to protect their own personal reputation to ensure sources will trust them in the future. And then there is the wider chill effect. Once a journalist gains a reputation for betraying confidences, the entire profession is tainted and sources potentially dry up for everyone. Protecting sources is also critical for ensuring a free flow of information to the public, an essential requirement of a healthy democracy. This bill also follows a well-publicised and welcome Marshall government push for increased transparency, openness, government accountability and informed public debate across all sectors of our community and agencies, a pledge I am particularly delighted to support. Secrecy, cover-up, lack of transparency, dictation rather than respectful engagement in recent years have led to escalating levels of constituent cynicism and mistrust in governments of all tiers and across all sectors. And this public disappointment bordering on despair is, in my belief, severely impacting, at the very least slowing, the implementation of any change, reform and improvements that are so sorely needed. The cynicism and public switch off from political and politicians in general has also served to increase the need for a moral compass provided by the media and an upsurge of the power of the people mantra. Our side, the Marshall Liberal government, proudly stand for increased transparency and the accountability that naturally follows, believing that if people can see and hear what is going on, some level of trust will be restored and a renewed sense of community camaraderie and working together for each other can follow. The damage that cases like Gilman and Oakden, chemo over and underdosing cover-ups in our public health system, child protection issues highlighted by the Chloe Valentine case cannot be underestimated and will take considerable time to restore. And having been outside of this parliament when those stories broke, I can attest to the shock felt by the community that such things can be allowed to happen under any government's watch. Much has been written in the media of late about the rise of distrust in government, and the above examples have certainly not assisted in this area. Key factors to building public trust are openness, transparency and real engagement in decision-making to demonstrate unequivocally that the public good has been addressed. Our new SA government has, I'm proud to say, already taken steps to make the Independent Commission Against Corruption more open and is considering improvements to the freedom of information processes, which is also supported by South Australia's public sector watchdog in its calling for an overhaul of freedom of information laws due to its belief current processes are costly and cumbersome. As SA Ombudsman Wayne Lyons told The Advertiser back in April, the whole point of freedom of information is to allow the transparency of government decision-making and for the taxpayers to know, for instance, where the money has been spent and to make sure it has been spent wisely and prudently. Mr Lyons declared, "The more limits there are on secrecy, the better it is for democracy." His comments were backed by Professor Rick Snell, considered one of Australia's foremost freedom of information experts, a University of Tasmania law lecturer who said third world countries have better FOI laws than SA. I quote him, Mr Deputy Speaker, "There is nothing in the Act robust enough to cope with today's spin doctors and information management." Although I would add personally, Mr Speaker, that the South Australian public seemed to see through the spin doctors on March 17. And included in his suggestions for improvements was fining and publicly naming ministers and heads of government departments found to be interfering with the process. Professor Snell commented people were still using Commodore 64 computers when the existing FOI legislation was created, which is indicative of their outdated nature. The current Royal Commission looking at banks and the financial sector has also highlighted the need for increased transparency and openness, as has the scheduled anti-corruption inquiry here into SafeWork SA's recently announced Independent Against Corruption with Bruce Lander set to hold its first open hearing for this inquiry on 1 June. This bill today is to protect whistleblowers is a natural flow-on from those efforts. Development of good public policy is rarely successful when just a handful of public servants or politicians push through or dictate change using restricted debate and access to key information. There has never been a more important time for protections to mainstream media to not only restore some faith in the leadership and motivations of governments, but with the advent of fake news and social media spreading misinformation, it is vital that journalists feel comfortable running factual stories. And with today's ability for anyone to easily set up an online campaign and reach thousands quickly and easily based on lies or otherwise, more and more corrupt behaviour is occurring, affecting increasing numbers of people. You only need to keep up with the list of scams circulating at any time to know there are very professional but sinister communicators from around the world infiltrating our lives here in South Australia. So it is little wonder that people have become disengaged and confused by who to trust and where. The Liberals have long backed the introduction of new shield laws of legal protection for our journalists, and it has been noted previously, and has been noted previously that we have been waiting long enough, as SA and Queensland are now the only states without said shield laws. I believe the right balance is achieved with a bill that does allow for the impact of the disclosure of the informant, and that a court can order the disclosure of confidential sources in limited circumstances, deemed as warranted where it is believed disclosing the source outweighs any adverse impacts it may have on the source or the value of maintaining a free press. The new protections will apply in instances where keeping sources confidential was clearly in the public interest, but it is noted that judges will be able to threaten punishment in instances where there is a greater good in discovering the identity. Importantly, in developing this bill, consultation has occurred with media stakeholders, the ICAC Commissioner, the Ombudsman, SAPOL, the Criminal Intelligence Commission, the Law Society, the Chief Justice, the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Crown Solicitor, so this bill is not offered lightly. And we advance it in the interest of transparency, openness and informed public debate, the cornerstones for effective leadership and governance. And with that, Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Minister.
I move that the sitting of the House be extended beyond 6 p.m.
That's been moved. Is that seconded? Yes, it's seconded. All those in favour? Carried. Sorry? If there's no no's. Member for Torrens.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.